Welcome to the AI4EU Café for live presentations around AI. Today's presentation is themed COVID-19 and content tracing apps with exciting speakers from the current European ICT research projects AI4EU and Helios, as well as guest speakers. For you who may not know, AI builds the first European artificial intelligence on-demand platform ecosystem, and Helios, the second project I talked about, aims to redefine the future of social networks with development of a platform for the creation of decentralized apps and services. Today, both projects are represented in this cafe. My name is Carmen McWilliams, and I'm the moderator and organizer. I'm the director of the company Grassroot Art and partner in the European AI4EU and Helios projects. Please take notice that this session will be recorded. The recording you will find on the AI4EU YouTube and GoToStage channel after the show if the speakers allow it. No confidential information shall be shared in this cafe session. All speakers express their personal views and opinions. This is not the official AI4EU or Helios project. Welcome, everybody. And Web Cafe, maybe you don't know it. This is a space which each week presents speakers from Europe. The Café is an online forum to gain insights into the European AI scene. Participants get the chance to share knowledge and experiences and meet stakeholders from the various areas of AI research and application. Please feel free to promote the live Café to your friends. So now I see the audience is there. Welcome, everybody. Great you're here. We have today a lot of participants and 9 exciting speakers. Welcome. What is the session about? COVID-19 and contact tracing apps. The rapid growth of technical solutions for COVID-19 contact tracing started the debate on their practical effectiveness and in particular their effect on our society. This time the Café session will be a new multi-presenter format with 9 exciting speakers to present their opinions about this hot topic. I will now present you in these slides the 9 speakers, and then we go one after the other through their presentations. This whole event will be about 90 minutes. If you feel, please ask questions. On the right side in the control panel, there is a text chat where you can write your questions. I will, after the presentations, read these questions to the speakers. And if you want to have a special speaker, please write his or her name into your question. And I wish you all a great event. So we start today with Teresa Scantamburlo from European Center for Living Technologies with a talk on the AI4EU Observatory for the COVID-19 crisis. I'm going now through all 9 speakers. We are not yet here, Teresa. Next one will be Atia Cortes from Barcelona Supercomputing Center, and her talk will be on COVID-19 technical solutions and the response from society. The next one will be Pierre Dewitte from Katholieke Universiteit Leuven and Daphné von der Eycken from Katholieke Universiteit Leuven. The implications of digital contact tracing solutions in light of EU data protection law. Then we will have our speaker Ville Ollikainen from VTT Technical Research Center of Finland with his talk on tracing encounters instead of tracing people. Then we will have Barbara Guidi from University of Pisa with her talk on the decentralization of social media. Then Kevin Koidl from Trinity College Dublin with his talk on proximity and trust in hyperlocal social networks. And we will have Simon Akis Papadopoulos from Center for Research and Technology, Hellas, CERTH, this talk on the relation between COVID-19 disinformation and contact tracing. And our final speaker today will be Stine Rasmussen from University of Southern Denmark and Santa Fe Institute with his talk on dark numbers in the COVID-19 pandemic testing and manual versus automated contact tracing. So we have great speakers here. Now I would like to talk about our first speakers, introduce Teresa and say hello to Teresa. Please, Teresa, are you there?
Yes, I am. Good afternoon. Hi, everybody.
We cannot see you, maybe.
Yeah.
Me. So, Teresa is a postdoctoral fellow at the European Center for Living Technology. Before she was appointed as a research associate at the University of Bristol, her main research interests include the ethical assessment of AI applications and the interaction between people and AI systems. So I see you. Hi, Teresa. How is it?
I'm good. Thank you. Thank you for organizing this great initiative.
Great. I'm so happy you're there. And I make you now the moderator. Yes. So we are looking forward. Teresa will present her talk, the AI4EU Observatory for the COVID-19 crisis. Yes, we see your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, so I would start. Okay, yes. So thanks again, Carmen, for organizing this web cafe. And it's a very great opportunity also for us to introduce a little bit the Observatory on Society and Artificial Intelligence and briefly introduce the work it's doing on the COVID-19 crisis. So first of all, what is the Observatory? It is an initiative which is part of an European project, the AI4EU project. And its main purpose is to stimulate a reflection and a discussion on the impact of AI technologies on people, human beings, and with a special focus on Europe, of course. And there are these peoples involved at the moment. I'm coordinating this initiative with Atia Cortes, Francesca Fofano, and Luke Seals and Ulises Cortes. We would like to establish and to stimulate this reflection by creating a multidisciplinary dialogue, basically a network of experts interacting and sharing knowledge from different backgrounds. And the area of interest is broad enough because we would like to focus not only on ethics, but even on legal issues, social, economic, and cultural issues. So this basically is the roots of this acronym ELSEC AI. And we are aware that there are many initiatives in Europe as well around ethics and AI, but we would like also to bridge some gaps because although this is a resource, of course, the possibility to interact with many projects and initiatives and other centers, but a risk is that all these initiatives remain isolated. So we would like to increase connections and especially to give visibility also to areas in Europe which are less covered. And so with respect to the COVID-19 crisis, we started monitoring the information and news about this global pandemic. And we realized that there were several AI researchers and also tech companies willing to contribute to this global crisis, and we started collecting information about technologies applied in this problem, and the data collection practices, the governance approach to data management, and the strategies adopted by different European countries, but in comparison also with non-European countries. And so the policies that each country has with respect to the tech solutions provided. And some output from this initial survey were several contributions. So the interaction with experts on this topic resulted in a number of articles. I'm just presenting a selection. So, for example, we published an article by Virginia Dignum stressing, for example, the requirements that AI technologies should consider when applied to these huge social problems, including robustness and transparency. But even we hosted articles, for example, by other experts like Itzia De Leocona, an ethicist, for example, focusing on the consequences in the post-COVID phases. So for our lives after the peak of the crisis. And she pointed, for example, to also the option of an immunity passport and a connected risk. And another article was about, for example, a selection and a summary of relevant discussions and webinars, because also there are many resources online, and we thought that a good service was to provide and to share brief summaries of relevant information and discussions on the privacy and transparency aspects affecting the tech solutions and the contact tracing apps. And the last article, for example, that we published this week was a summary of the lessons that some researchers learned from these early phases of the pandemic concerning, for example, errors in data collection, the inaccuracy of data, and how these data were used, for example, to influence decision-making of policymakers and so on. So, of course, these articles are open and published, and everyone also could contribute, and we are happy to get feedback from you and all the attendees of this web cafe. And in this context, we also established a collaboration with some researchers from Belgium, from Katholieke Universiteit Leuven, Vrije University, and the Knowledge Centers Data and Society. And this is a work in progress. We are finalizing this for a publication. And this is basically a collaboration that we started to review the contact tracing apps which were proposed mostly in Europe, and the requirements that we need to consider under the European legal framework. So it was a kind of survey about technologies, but with respect to the legal requirements. And this is better discussed by the next speaker and my colleague, Atia Cortes.
Yes, thank you, Teresa. And I think your partner, Atia, will also now say hello. And this is very exciting. So basically, who's interested can participate, I understand. And more information one finds on the AI4EU platform, right?
Yeah, all the articles and also other resources, because we are not only publishing articles, but even other resources are available in the AI4EU platform. And the observatory is accessible from the homepage of the AI4EU website.
Thank you. Hi, Atia. Hi. I shortly introduce you and then I give you the floor. Atia Cortes is from Barcelona Supercomputing Center. She is a computer science engineer with a master's degree and a PhD in artificial intelligence. She is a postdoctoral fellow at the Barcelona Supercomputing Center. Before that, she was an assistant professor and a researcher at the Universiteit Politecnica di Catalunya, where she was involved in several EU-funded projects related to AI solutions for healthcare. Wow. Now I will make you the moderator. One moment. You get it?
Do you see my screen?
Moment. Yes, I see your screen. Great. And you will introduce your talk.
Yeah. Okay. So I will introduce the main focus of this working paper that Teresa presented. So the idea was to do first a review of the different technologies that were existing to monitor the spread of this coronavirus pandemic, but also to provide this legal framework that my colleagues will present later. And this was one of the main topics that caught our attention from the beginning of this pandemic and the confinement. And we started just collecting a lot of information, and this grew to what we have today. So the thing is that at the beginning, we saw that there were many manual contact tracing methodologies. In general, they were online forms, many times on Google Forms, that were trying to collect information that citizens were willingly providing. These methodologies were already used in previous pandemics, and they were not always supported by technology, by this kind of online forms, but they could also be done through other traditional methods of interaction, such as phone calls or physical visits to the doctor or to the nurse. And this process usually requires a lot of personal information, sensitive information, such as about your age, your gender, but also where you live, and also about the contacts, the social interactions that you've had during the last 2 weeks, more or less. The problem with coronavirus, it was observed that it was spreading so fast, it was becoming so fast a global pandemic, that it was difficult to be first quick enough to process all this information, but also it's difficult to be exhaustive on the social interactions that we are having and on determining which of them are meaningful to be considered as a risk interaction that could cause an infection, let's say. In addition, it presents some privacy invading problems because, as I said, you need to provide different personal information, not only about yourself, but also about your social contacts, such as names or addresses. And if we add the fact that we had these online forms which were hosted on Google, for example, it had some concerns on how this data was being collected, stored, and processed, and who was having access to this data. So this was one of the first things that caught our attention. But then the discussion switched to these digital contact tracings, also technologies, and we had two options at the beginning. One of them was using GPS location, and it was more meant to be kind of a 24/7 tracking of everyone, and it also raised from the beginning many ethical concerns. So then, especially in Europe, we have this turn towards this privacy preserving design using Bluetooth technology and this proximity protocol. We have this another discussion about centralized and decentralized, which I will not get into detail because I think that there will be another speaker that will talk about this. But I would like to talk about the ethical issues that we also find with these digital contact tracing methodologies. Because, so in the end, the objective is to avoid, if we face second waves of this pandemic, we want to avoid, again, lockdowns and these kind of measures that are not sustainable in the long term. But we also need to justify whether these methodologies, which are kind of invading our lives, will be efficient enough in the end. When we talk about efficiency, we mean that if they will be able to save more lives than with other methodologies, but also if they will be private enough with our data, they will be preserving all this information, if there will be robustness, both from the technical perspective, so being robust for any kind of cyber attack, but also socially robust. And there is a concern also on leaving out vulnerable groups or people that don't have access to this kind of technology. And then as a last point, there is this auditability process. So apps should provide enough information to be able to be auditable and understand how they work technically, and also how they are dealing with all of our data. Okay, so this is something that we've tried to present on the paper, but also we wanted to understand which was the social response on these technologies. And this is where the Knowledge Center Data and Society provided a survey that they did in April, in which they asked to a group of citizens in Belgium whether they would install or not an application. So as you can see here, 39% of them said directly that they didn't want to install the app, but there was also 51% that said that they would install it. The thing is, when you ask if they would install the app according to a specific goal of using this app, and if this goal is to, for example, regulate the access to public places, then people is more reluctant to download these kind of applications. On the other side, we also saw some differences on the kind of technology that was being used between Bluetooth and GPS, and also who would be accessing this data. So people in the end is more willing to share personal data with health institutions than with governments or telcos. What we see here is that people is more concerned maybe not about the centralized or decentralized protocol that in the end these contact tracing apps could use, but what will be the use that they will do of the data that they are collecting and the knowledge that they are generating. So for how long this data will be collected and shared with others, what usage of this data will they do after the crisis, and who in the end will be accessing this personal information. So this social response, I think it has been changing a little bit. Also here I put some examples of other surveys in other countries. You can see that there is kind of this 50-50 reaction. There is here another graph of people. They are still not really decided on whether they would install it or not. But the thing is that now people is starting to worry about other things. It's not about only installing this app, but it's also about the consequences of using the app. So what we see is that there is a big problem with trust and this relation between society and especially with governments. And I think that this is one of the problems that are delaying the deployment in the end of these contact tracing apps, because after a few months, we are still, at least in Europe, debating about many things, but we haven't seen much adoption of the apps, which in the end is the key to make it successful and make it useful to take better decisions in the future. And I will leave it here.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Atia. This is so it's basically the acceptance is the big question, how the society, how the public will accept it. It's like I just give this small thing in Germany. We just had since Tuesday, last Tuesday, so 6 million, and now 7 million, and now it stagnates. It's I think in all the different European countries, it's a similar approach. They are the enthusiasts, they install it, yeah, and then it gets slower and it stagnates.
Yeah, it's the same. Yeah.
for your talk. As we are here having the next presenters waiting, there are a duo coming from Katholieke Universiteit Leuven, which is Pierre Dewitte and Daphné van der Eycken. I want to introduce you. Maybe you both come in if you like. Pierre and Daphné also work together with Atia and Teresa on the paper we just heard about. And I just want to shortly introduce Pierre. Pierre obtained his bachelor and master degree of laws with a specialization in corporate and intellectual property law from University Katholieke Leuven in 2016. As part of his master program, he spent 6 months in the University of Helsinki, where he strengthened his knowledge in European law. In 2017, he completed the Advanced Master of Intellectual Property in ICT Law at the KU Leuven with a special focus on privacy, data protection, and electronic communications law. Thank you. Hi, Pierre.
Hi.
And now, Daphné, I, by the way, also introduce you because you will do the next presentation together. Daphné van der Eycken holds a Master in Laws from Ghent University with a particular focus on IP, IT, and European economic law. And she's currently working as an academic researcher at KU Leuven CITIP and pursuing an advanced LLM degree from Liège University with a particular focus on EU competition and IP law. So our legal competence is coming now, and I will give you the floor. Hello. I will make you, Pierre, the moderator now, so you can start, and afterwards give it to Daphné. Yeah, you are now the moderator. Yes, we see your presentation, and great.
Okay, good. Carmen, my presentation, right?
Perfect.
Okay, good. Yeah, thank you for organizing that. I think it will be a very fruitful discussion today. So the point of our brief talk will be, of course, not to provide you with a full-fledged analysis of the whole GDPR, because that would largely outscope the presentation of today. But we'll try nonetheless to provide you with some of the most important details in the impact of the EU data protection law framework on digital contact tracing apps. So I'll personally take care of the distinction between centralized and decentralized approach, while my colleague Daphné will discuss more in depth the EDPB guidelines that have been issued recently. So I just want to briefly, because this will also be the topic of another speech, to briefly discuss the distinction between what we call a centralized versus a decentralized approach to digital contact tracing, because this has some impact on, of course, the compliance with EU data protection law. So what you see here on the screen now is basically the infrastructure that is common to both a centralized and a decentralized approach, so where you have a bunch of app users here sharing and receiving ephemeral identifiers between them, so you can actually verify whether you have been with an at-risk contact. So that's something that is common for both approach. Although there are three main distinctions that I would like to briefly touch upon now, those being first the creation of the ephemeral identifiers, second the information that is transferred by an app user to what we call the backend server, and then lastly how the risk score is computed. So straight into it. With a centralized approach, what happens is when you install the app for the first time, the backend server, so the central entity, will create a unique identifier for you and use that unique identifier with its own key to create an ephemeral identifier that is rotating over time, and it will push it to the app user's phone. And that's what the app user's phone will basically use in the context of digital contact tracing. With that, once a user has been diagnosed positive to COVID-19, as it's the case here, what will be transferred to the backend server is the ephemeral IDs that have been observed by the infected app user. So those guys here, ephemeral identifiers, will be shared by this guy here to the backend server. So of course, the major drawback with that approach is the fact that the backend server, given the fact that it has the key, will always be able to basically link an ephemeral identifiers back to its identifiable form. So that's of course something which, as I will explain later, doesn't happen in a decentralized approach. Once that is done, the backend server will then compute the risk score for each app user and notify them. So there is no transfer or of any other information than a notification from the backend server to the potentially infected app user. So that's what happens in the centralized approach. Now, in a decentralized approach, as you can see here, when you use the app for the first time, the unique identifiers that you will create is basically stored locally on your own phone, and you will use that to generate pseudo-random ephemeral identifiers yourself. So there is no involvement of the backend server when it comes to the creation of your unique ID. Once a user has been diagnosed positive to COVID-19, instead of, as in a centralized approach, sharing those guys' ephemeral identifiers, the diagnosed positive user will share its own emitted ephemeral identifiers to the backend server. Then the backend server will basically just act as a middleman to push those emitted FIDs back to all the other app users here. So lastly, what happens in a decentralized approach is the fact that the risk score will be computed locally on each individual's phone. So basically it boils down to the fact that you will have to choose to either trust the backend server, so most of the time the National Health Authority and governmental entities with the processing of data, or trust the app users themselves. So it's again out of the scope to discuss the advantages, disadvantages of all that approach, but yeah, this is something that I wanted to clarify first. So now straight into the general data protection regulation. So the thing that we lawyers always go for when we are looking at a regulatory framework is the scope of application. So we ask ourselves the question, okay, is this framework even applicable? And in context of GDPR, well, there are basically the material scope application and the personal scope application. So we need a processing of personal data. So of course, the notion of personal data, again, detailing everything that has been said so far on the notion of personal data would be too much for today, but it has been defined, of course, through the criteria of identifiability here. So that criteria, of course, has raised a lot of issues in practice because it basically boils down to whether or not you can reasonably likely link a piece of information back to an identifiable natural person. So in the context of contact tracing apps, digital contact tracing apps that are Bluetooth based, it is generally acknowledged that personal data is processed. Of course, you could argue, depending on the approach taken, depending on the perspective that you adopt, and depending on the type of user that are concerned. Again, happy to discuss that with all of you after, but I think it would be a bit too much for today. But generally speaking, yeah, well, the material scope application is okay here. Then you obviously need a controller or a processor. So here, of course, the notion of who is in control, who is basically bears the responsibility to comply with data protection law is on the controller. And that person, according to the regulation, is the person who alone or jointly with other entities will determine the purposes and the means of that processing. So as it has been emphasized already by countless guidance documents, it's more about who determines the why and the hows of the processing operation. So of course you have tons of case law and guidance document on that note, but it is generally acknowledged that in the context of COVID-19 digital contact tracing apps, the controllership will lie with the National Health Authority. Of course, again, that's up to debate. So if you're looking at, for instance, the role of the app user, that's something that's very interesting from a legal perspective. You could also try to argue somehow that it has a controllership role as well. But of course, that would again exceed. So happy to discuss that after. So now we know the GDPR is immediately applicable. So I just wanted to pinpoint some of the crucial principles of the general data protection regulation. So not everything, of course, but just the one that I think are the most valuable for today's discussion. The first one being lawfulness. So since there is a processing of personal data and there is a controller, well, the first principle of the regulation tells you, okay, you need a lawful ground for that. You cannot do that in a vacuum. So you need to ground that on anything you want. And there is a list of Article 6 of all the lawful ground that you could potentially use. So in the guidance, and my colleague Daphné will talk a bit more about that, it has been already acknowledged that legal obligation or public interest, so Article 6.1c or 6.1e here, are basically the most appropriate lawful grounds. So in any case, this basically tells every country that they would probably need to adopt a suitable legislation for that. So that's the first principle. Second one being, of course, if you're rolling out a digital contact tracing application, you need to be transparent about it. And there is a huge list of information that you need to provide the data subject with in the regulation. Same goes for, well, it's not really transparency, but it's related. The fact that open source code is always welcome. And the fact that conducting and publishing a DPIA, so data protection impact assessment, is also something that is considered as a good practice. Purpose limitations. So of course, if you roll out such a feature of digital contact tracing, you can only use it for contact tracing. So it's very tempting. It might be tempting though for national health authorities to also say, okay, this database is actually very interesting. So why not using it for other purposes such as law enforcement? So of course, that is a kind of processing purpose that would not be compatible with the first goal of the system, which is to trace contact and hinder the development of the illness. So that's something crucial as well. And lastly, a very minor point on data minimization, saying that you could go for a Bluetooth-based system or you could go for a GPS-based system, but it has generally be acknowledged the fact that, well, you would collect probably excessive data by doing that through GPS data rather than Bluetooth data. So of course, that's the reason why most initiatives in Europe have been at least focusing on the use of Bluetooth-based solution rather than GPS-based solution. And that will be it from my side. So my colleague Daphné will take that over, speaking about the principles and the guidelines that have been issued recently by the European Data Protection Board.
Hi, great.
Thank
so, hi, great. I will now make you the moderator, okay? So, I hope I didn't make it yet. Now you can do. So, should now work. Yes, I see you. Hi, Daphné. I don't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Okay, well, great.
Nice that you're here.
Okay, so first of all, Carmen, thank you for inviting us. It's been a really nice discussion up until here, and I look forward to hear the other ones. Let me go through my slides. Okay, so as Pierre said, the EDPB gave some guidance recently, which is really important because, as you all know, all the member states kind of have been doing their own initiatives, and the EDPB is actually here to make sure that the GDPR is applied in a consistent and uniform way across the European Union. So the guidelines was very welcome. And first of all, what they're going to stress is that whenever it is possible, you should actually use anonymized data instead of pseudonymized data. They reiterate again, and that is something that the EDPB has been saying for quite a while now, that the threshold to be able to say that your data is completely anonymized, so de-identified, is pretty high. So they actually stress that, you know, you should not be able to single out anyone. There should not be any kind of linkability. There should not be inference. So as you know, that's a really hard thing to do when you're talking about location data. The EDPB also tells us that the anonymization methodology should be transparent. What am I doing? Okay. That the downloading of the application should always be voluntarily. So it is preferred. The EDPB tells us that it's not really the purpose for the member state to oblige any citizens to download the app. Then they also tell that, you know, data controllers, so as Pierre said, that is a person that is going to decide on a lot of stuff. So it should be clearly defined. Its roles and responsibilities should also be really clearly set out. Then that relates to the purpose minimization. So any purpose that you're going to give should be really clearly defined so that you exclude any possible further use that would not be compatible or that would not be used for the combating of the COVID-19 epidemic. And then proximity data should be preferred instead of location data. Then, as Pierre said, you need a legal basis, right? So you cannot just process any data. You need to be saying on what ground you're going to do it. And the EDPB says that, you know, consent might not be the most appropriate one. So it actually prefers to base your processing of data on a task in the public interest, which is here the preservation of public health. And then it also, as some further more general guidance goes and tells us that, you know, the algorithm should always stay under supervision of health personnel to avoid false positives or false negatives. So whenever the application collects your infection, it should be, well, let's say that the application should make sure that there was actually an infection going on. And then the EDPB also gives us some sort of one-pager of more functional and technical requirements. So the EDPB tells us that you should reduce data to a strict minimum. Well, I'm not going to go all over the requirements, but I did wanna share one specifically. So Pierre talked about the centralized and decentralized approach. A lot of member states have chosen between them, but EDPB actually tells us that, you know, both are considered viable options. So the thing is that you can choose between them, but then you have to make sure that your security measures that you set in place are adequate. So if you go for the centralized approach, that's okay, but you just have to make sure that your data security has an as high level as you would with a decentralized approach. And then what I also thought was interesting is that the EDPB, as some sort of last requirements, stresses the importance of a very clear communication with the public about what exact link citizens should download to make sure that citizens download the right app. I will not go and download any sort of app launched by a third party, also to mitigate risks of any of that use. And then as a very last point, and before going to the next presenter, Pierre and I wanted to also stress a little bit the importance of fundamental rights. So both the European Convention of Human Rights and the Charter of the EU actually recognize your rights to privacy, rights for private and family life, even your protection of personal data is a fundamental right. And so whenever you have an interference, which is clearly the case here with the contact tracing apps, as long as you don't use anonymized data, well, you have a 3-step test that you need to answer before you can make that interference. And as you can see, so you have one, it has to be in accordance with the law. That is actually necessary so that citizens kind of know and can foresee whatever will happen with their data. So they can reasonably expect their personal data to be processed within that app. It has to be necessary in a democratic society, so you cannot go beyond whatever is necessary. And then the third one, of course, is that you need a legitimate interest, let's say. So these three together just make sure that whenever you have a fundamental right to your privacy, you counterbalance it against the emergence of a crisis such as this health crisis. Well, you kind of always need to ensure that they are in balance. We wanted to just give this as a takeaway because whenever an application is being developed, the automatic reaction is to go to the GDPR, and that's actually really good because you have a big awareness of this legislative instrument, but you should never forget that privacy remains a fundamental right. And now I'm going to try to give back the.
Yes, you don't have to do anything. Thank you very much for your great presentation. You can relax now a little bit. So we got now an insight into the European legal framework for creating apps and services, and I think this is basically a basis for ideally we could have had one contact tracing app for whole Europe, which is not the case in the moment, but later we can ask questions about these legal experts. And now I would like to go to the next presenter, because we are going now switching over to the Helios project speakers, starting with Ville, who is the coordinator of Helios. And Helios has one of the aims to create decentralized apps and services. Hi, Ville.
Hello.
But here we'll talk about tracing encounters instead of tracing people. That's the title. And I will introduce you, Ville. Ville Ollikainen received his master's degree in technical physics in 1989 from Helsinki University of Technology, with an academic minor and 2.5-year employment in the Laboratory of Industrial Psychology. Mr. Ollikainen has been working at VTT Technical Research Center of Finland as a senior scientist focusing on media integration. His current activities include privacy-preserving recommendation system, privacy by design, targeting, advertising, and social networking services. Most recently, coordinating European Union Horizon 2020 funded project Helios, developing a novel peer-to-peer platform for privacy-enabled social media. Closely related to the topics of privacy, Mr. Ollikainen works today in applied cryptography research team at VTT. So, again, welcome.
Okay.
And I will give you now the moderator. One moment.
Ville, it's your time now, and here you are. You are the moderator.
What Pierre just presented, it is in three parts. So first of all, a couple of words about a centralized model of tracing, then an example of decentralized model, and finally the actual subject of tracing encounters and not necessarily the people anymore. So first, here is a simplified version of a centralized model. So in the beginning, we have two actors here. We have Alice and we have Bob, two persons. They are in the centralized model registering themselves to a health authority, which gives them some identifiers. So in this case, Alice gets identifier 313 and Bob gets the identifier 412. Of course, as Pierre pointed out, these identifiers may be ephemeral, meaning that they may change over time. But the point is that the health authority has a registry who is behind each one of these identifiers and how to reach them. So whenever Alice and Bob are in proximity, they are changing these identifiers. So when Alice is near to Bob, Alice will get Bob's identifier 712 and Bob gets Alice's identifier 313. And they will memorize these identifiers to their list. So who they have met. They don't know the names, they just know the numbers. So when Bob gets diagnosed positive, gets sick, he will then send his list who he has met during the period of time when he could have been passed on the disease to someone else. He gives that list to the health authority. Health authority will check that, okay, 313 is Alice, so the authority can get then to Alice and say that Alice go to test. So very simplified way to do it. As pointed out previously, this has privacy issues, especially if the security measures are not placed appropriately. So the health authority has a record of all users and all IDs. So that is really a place which is interesting for all sorts of attackers and criminals, just to get hold of that data. But even worse, there is the information about our social interactions. So with whom we are meeting. So if this particular information goes into wrong hands, it can be used really badly. So by some regime which wants to control us, not necessarily so far-fetched thinking in today's world. And also it could be used for social influencing activities. So when someone gets hold of our social networking, they can then do different plans how to affect our election behavior and that sort of things. So in a nutshell, privacy is not necessarily only a personal issue. It is also an issue of the society as a whole. Then if we go to decentralized tracing, it doesn't need to have any centralized entity. Instead, as pointed out previously, these identifiers can be locally generated. So here Alice has generated an ID 313, that's a random number. Bob has generated random number 7112. And once again, when they meet each other, they will exchange these identifiers and memorize which identifiers they have been in contact with. So as a side note, these IDs are typically changing every 3 minutes, every 10 minutes, every 15 minutes. So they are ephemeral but the people, when they change their identifiers, they have to memorize what their previous identifiers have been. So Bob gets infected. He will upload his list of these ephemeral IDs to a reporting server. Among them is 313, which is Alice's number. And the reporting server is publishing these identifiers. Of course, they are not associated with any individuals, so it is okay to publish them. And among this alerting list, there is also this 313. And when Alice notices that, okay, 313 has been one of my identifiers, she can then go and have a test. So this is a much better alternative. It should be noted that this is still tracing people. So their identifiers are associated with individuals, and that is to somewhat limiting what is safe to do. Also, as a further note, there may be also some eavesdropping. So someone have a beacon, something which is listening how people are exchanging these identifiers within the period of constant identifiers before they are changed. So here is a eavesdropper called Carl, which records that, okay, these people have been here in the location, and this is the kind of a scenario that we don't exactly know how Carl would use that information, but because that information is available, we can expect that someone could figure out how to use it in a malicious way. So then we go to the subject that why do we have to trace people and identifiers at all? Because we can do it also other way. So Alice has no identifier, Bob has no identifier. When Alice and Bob are in proximity, they are generating a common secret. And the method how to do common secrets in cryptography is typically a Diffie-Hellman key exchange method. What is good in this Diffie-Hellman is that when someone is eavesdropping their communications, the Carl cannot possibly figure out what is the secret between Alice and Bob. So only Alice and Bob knows exactly the identifier of this particular encounter. Not each other, but this particular encounter. So, similar way, both of them are recording their encounters. When Bob gets sick, he uploads the encounters to the reporting server, and then the reporting server tell that, okay, these encounters are at risk, and Alice then compares her list with the published list and notices that, okay, there is one encounter that she might have been getting the disease. So pretty much the same way, but this time there is absolutely no identifiers of each individuals. This is a feasible approach, as we see. It's Diffie-Hellman is quite commonly used. There is one, there is one drawback of this whole thing, and that is the time that has to be taken for generating the Diffie-Hellman. So there's a bidirectional communication. But fortunately, if we think about how COVID gets spread, it means that you have to spend some time with another person. So if it is like 10 minutes or 15 minutes, you have plenty of time to do this Diffie-Hellman. And as an additional advantage here is that because there is absolutely no personal information involved, then we can also record some additional information, which is like location. So this location information shouldn't be associated with each encounters, but processed separately. We can then use that for analyzing and generating maps, like in which place has the infected people been moving, for instance. About 2.5 months ago, we made a white paper of this idea. That was very early days of this pandemic, I have to say. But here is the link. You can find it from these slides afterwards, or just Google white paper Ollikainen Halunen. That's the reading for the subject. So this was my presentation. Thank you, Karin.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. So yes, why not? I mean, it sounds totally attractive, this solution. And is, for example, Finland using this solution?
No, unfortunately, no one is using it. We have been creating it, let's say, for food for thought in this field.
So it's
looking forward to sharing ideas and thoughts with anyone who might be interested.
Okay, so we see later in the debate about the questions, because questions are coming. And I'm now switching over to the next speaker, which is Barbara. Barbara, I hope.
Yes, I'm here.
I hear you. This is great.
Yes. Sorry for the webcam. I will show myself after, so you know.
Make you already the moderator, so you can do that. I make you the moderator, and I shortly introduce now Barbara with her talk on decentralization of social media. She's also a partner in the project. I see you.
Hi.
Hi. There's sometimes. Okay. So Barbara Dewitte is currently an assistant professor at the Department of Computer Science of the University of Pisa. She received her PhD in computer science from the University of Pisa in 2006. She's part of the UNIP team in the H2020 Helios project. Her current research interests include distribution systems, P2P networks, complex network, social network analysis, decentralized online social networks, dynamic community detection, and the blockchain technology. So I let you now talk, Barbara.
Yes, okay. Good afternoon. Wait a minute. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'd like to introduce myself only to understand also the topic of this talk. I'm, as Carmen said, I'm an assistant professor at the Department of Computer Science in Pisa. I'm working on the decentralization of online social network. But I'm working in a research group, and the main topics of our groups are listed here: decentralized online social network, peer-to-peer network, blockchain technology in general, in particular for me, blockchain online social media, and social media analysis. So this is to introduce also the topic of this talk. So I think that any one of us knows what is the impact of social media on people. Probably sometimes I'm not clear the number of users that are using social media, etc. But if you consider that this is the total population, the internet users are more or less the 60%. And among these users, the 50% has at least an account on social media. So they are active. In particular, they are active. What is mean active? That they are using social media every day. Okay. And it's important also to say that there is a now a lot of users now are using mobile phone to connect on internet and so also in the social media application. And as we can see, these are statistics at the beginning of this year, the 2020. We can see that 90% of applications that are used today on mobile devices are in particular chat apps like WhatsApp or other Telegrams, etc., and also social network apps. So it's clear that there is a big impact of social media on our life. Is it enough? No. What about the time that we spend on social media? The time increase year per year. This year in the 2020, this global web index report that users spend an average about 2.5 hours on social media. And Facebook is always the leader, but also, as we can see here, we have Facebook, YouTube, WhatsApp. So principally, this is what I showed before. So people prefer to stay in social media environment with the mobile application and to share information thanks to these social media apps. What happens during the lockdown? I'm an Italian researcher, so we started before other European countries. And during the lockdown, we can see a spike in the usage of the social media. Why? Because social media has been the primary channel to stay in contact with the family, friends, and others, partners, etc., etc. During the lockdown. Results show that people use the platform in order to exchange information about health and safety updates. I think famous events are content on Instagram, dinners or happy hours among friends through WhatsApp or Skype. So a lot of events to stay in contact with the family, for example, when the world was in the lockdown situation, the world in particular in Europe in this period. So probably thanks to the topic, the topic shared in this environment, in this platform, health and safety update, there is the idea that social media could be used as a contact tracing app. How? Because when you propose a contact tracing app, you are proposing something else, not the social media. Social media are used, and we know now also the statistics highlighted that the usage of social media is really strong, and they are part of our life. So thanks to the social media, we can use only one app and use the social media for contact tracing. It's clear that we need other information, geographical location or other information, but we can use this, and so people can simply use what they are using every day, but with the focus of the contact tracing. So what we have now with the contact tracing hub. Yes, this could be possible, but it's clear that the big privacy issue concerning social media are a big limitation for this direction. Why? It's clear Cambridge Analytica is probably the most famous scandal. Facebook was involved in this scandal, but not only Facebook, and believe me, all the platform, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, each platform in the past had at least one privacy problem. So the privacy problem and the privacy issue concerning private data is a big limitation for the usage of social media in this direction. So one solution, researcher, but not only researcher, started to study how the problem of privacy could be resolved. And the solution, a solution proposed in the past, but is really is also current solution, is the decentralization of social media. So what is a decentralized social media? Usually we use decentralized network, peer-to-peer network, but also mobile network. And a decentralized social media is a social media runs on a decentralized network. So we have the same social services, but exploiting a decentralized network. So we have no central authority, no censorship, more control over our data, control on fake news, misinformation, probably also thanks to rewarding system. Now blockchain and the rewarding is usually used in the social media to reward user for their social activity. And if we can think to a decentralization of social media, we need to think that today Facebook is a central authority, can hold a central authority and decide what is and what is not a fake or fake news, but also decide what our data, where our data needs to be stored and who can access to the data. A decentralized platform would mean that the user do not need to trust an authority. So do not need to trust in Facebook, for example. This is possible. This is possible, and there is a high interest on the decentralization of social media in order to overcome the privacy issue in particular. It is, the University of Pisa is a partner of Helios, the Helios project. Helios is the H2020 project based on the decentralization of social media. We are trying to do this, but also we need to think that also the social media companies are thinking that decentralization could be applied to this platform. For example, Twitter, the Twitter CEO, Jeff Dorsey, announced that the company will provide at least a team to study how to decentralize the platform. So I think that the Twitter announcement could be an opportunity for the decentralization of social media. So is the decentralization the future of social media? Probably yes. If the social media companies try to go in this direction, probably we will have decentralized social media in the future. So that's all. This is my contact, the website, and also the page on scholarship. If someone needs to contact me for further information in this direction. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you. Because I think we got also a deeper insight what Helios is about and also your work there. And I think we do understand now decentralization. And I get asked by several participants already if our presentations are available afterwards because they're so well explained. So, thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you too.
Yeah, and I will go further so we can give everybody of this a chance to talk. Also, Kevin comes from Helios, so he's from Trinity College Dublin. Kevin, are you there? Bye, Barbara.
Yes, here, yeah.
Great. So I will already change to you so you get ready for showing a presentation. Your title today, your talk will be about proximity and trust in hyperlocal social networks, and I will introduce you like all the speakers. Kevin Koidl is a research fellow at Trinity College Dublin. His research interests are social technologies, machine learning, and natural language processing. So now we are curious on your presentation. I think.
Yeah, thank you, Carmen, for the nice introduction and also the invitation to this. This presentation connects very much to the information, the presentations you heard in the previous speakers, both Barbara and Ville, obviously, but also the presentations before that. It's more meant to give insight into how social interactions are now changing, or the perception of it is changing, and also how we can reflect this in applications. So we, for instance, saw a presentation related to proximity and tracing of COVID-related activities, proximity networks, mention of Bluetooth or GPS, all these kind of technical things. However, it's interesting for me as a scientist to see how these developments will unfold in a more application focus. So this is a couple of slides related to work we are doing in this space. Very, very high level. I don't have time to go into details, but please reach out via my email address. So I work for Trinity College, as Carmen said. I'm also affiliated with the ADAPT Research Center, which you can see here in the picture, and which is a research center that has 4 universities, 4 Dublin-based universities related to it. So it's a very big network of universities related to this. And obviously, we're also partner of the Helios project. So the 4 areas I just want to tap into, and they're a little bit also timely in terms of, in research we always look at like 5 to 10 years, 10 to 15 years ahead, so it's kind of in that direction. So hyperlocal social networks, this is a use case for Helios related to some of the COVID ideas, not ideas, but COVID necessities. A hybrid communication concept called Heliosphere, which is partly related with Helios. And then maybe just to extend the scope maybe into 10, 15 years into the future, which are virtual social spaces, and how will those technologies evolve? So just a very brief refocus. So Ville and Barbara talked about this, so I won't go into details, but one of the key concepts of Helios is a so-called contextual social network, also called a contextual ego network, because the person, in this case, let's say me, is the center of my social network. So on Facebook, we know this, or in current social media platforms, we know this as being one social network, and this social network basically being binary. So basically just I meet Jane at a business conference, and then I just add Jane to my network, and it's a binary connection, but there's a very little scope of adding information such as where did I meet Jane, what was the intention of the meeting. I can't even get timestamps out of most of the applications, so it's very hard for me to afterwards glean how or what the purpose of this social interaction was, and this brings the context into account. So what is important in Helios is that a human has several social networks, and they all depend on the context, which means all depend on where I am or in what context I'm engaging with the individual, such as social networks just for my neighbors, or social networks just for my colleagues, one for my Tuesday evening social group. You can think of it as WhatsApp groups in a way, but just WhatsApp groups with all the power of social networks, and being very flexible and very dynamic. Now, this idea is a contextual social network, and our brain works similar. We have hundreds of social networks in our brain, and we associate when we meet people with the intention or the context of the interaction. Now, this becomes interesting for COVID, or it becomes interesting in general. It's a fascinating research area, because what we can then do, and what we're doing in Helios, is we can then assign different levels of trust, different contexts. I might have Bob, my colleague, in the social network of colleagues, and also Bob in the social network of friends. But I might trust Bob in my social network of colleagues with a high level of document access, with a high level of information access, because he's a really good person in the job that he does. But as a friend, I wouldn't even trust him with walking my dog, because I know he's just a party animal or something. I'm just making this up, obviously, at the moment. But what I'm trying to say is that there's different levels of trust depending on the context in which the social interaction has evolved. And that means that we can configure the contextual networks. And now that becomes interesting for COVID, because depending on the context I'm moving in, which is usually we define context as space and time, but it also can have more dimensions, obviously. I can make the application, I can potentially make an application that is built on Helios COVID aware, which means in certain contexts, I need the application to be more careful with how close I am to people. We also use Bluetooth and contextual networks. So how close am I moving to people? Or am I not moving close to people? So we can think of social networks as constantly evolving, changing networks that have the ability to be COVID aware, if we want to call it that. Because in certain contexts, I need to be more careful because there's more old people around, maybe more elderly people around. In other contexts, I don't have to be careful because there's not elderly people around. So context being very much thought as a physical space. So those are things we're looking at with the Helios project. And again, a lot of that is still evolving. A lot of that is still being developed. But Helios being a platform in which you can build social networks, and it is technically possible with the foundations of Helios to think of something what is COVID aware, which would be something that uses Bluetooth proximity to build contextual networks that are in somehow aware of, okay, there's certain members here where we have to be careful of or not careful of. So extending social networks towards this COVID awareness is an interesting research question. Second project is hybrid communication. So what we're seeing now a lot is that conferences such as what Carmen is doing here now, but also music, cultural events, things that involve a stage, all of that is being disrupted now and will be disrupted for the foreseeable future to either go completely digital or be cancelled. And then we have this very binary situation. But an interesting thing is to say, okay, let's go hybrid, where we look at ways of involving online audience, digital online audience, to be represented by avatars or represented by a more interactive medium, to bring them into a physical space. So we will have people in a physical space, less people obviously because of social distancing, and then we can use technology to beam people into that space. So basically saying, let's figure out how we can use current technology, such as 360-degree cameras, avatar technology, very basic physical representations of people, and how can we then help people that are online, and how can we help these people to be in the physical space, to be represented in the physical space, and also help the people that are in the physical space to engage with whatever that technology is that should be beyond the screen, obviously with an avatar representation or similar, to engage with who is the person on the other side. So that's research we're looking at in relation to Helios. There's a lot more in this project, but I just wanted to focus on that part because it's become relevant for COVID. We've been doing this project for over 1.5 years now, and already talked about hybrid concepts then, which was more for people that have disabilities. But now this is moving into a really relevant space because of COVID and having these hybrid events in this area. The third one, obviously, this is like looking 10 to 15 years ahead, is how can we create virtual social spaces in which social interactions take place in a way that they have a high level of trust, or in a way that they increase the social interaction. And things we're looking at there is how can we use AI to create personalized virtual spaces where I can again beam avatars of people into this space, or beam objects into this space that allow me to socially interact with individuals. And again, very relevant for COVID or any other disease that might happen in future, because then this extension of where, if we take the path, we have Helios, which is a very much social media application that we would be looking at the next, say, 5-year window. We have a hybrid space where we, like Heliosphere, where you can see that already avatars and mixed reality objects are moving into, because people are online and want to be represented. And then we have the extreme version, which is a 10 to 15-year window, where again, this is very much powered by also tested motivated by the COVID situation we're in, where we say, okay, let's let's go one step further and say how can we actually mix reality and say and figure out how we can configure social spaces, social virtual spaces, so that social interaction is empowered and close to reality and somehow supported or similar to reality. So that's me from that perspective. And again, this was very high level, and I deliberately kept it for that because I'm aware that this is not a pure research audience, but there's a lot of research and a lot of findings and publications behind these 3 projects. So please reach out at any time, and that's my part then. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Kevin. Super hyper. So we are having already an outlook where all this research can go to. It's not like limited to the current pandemic, but we are like can go 15 years ahead. Thank you. And I will switch right over to Symeon, Akis. Hi.
Hello.
The relation between COVID-19, disinformation, and contact tracing is your title. And I also introduce you, Dr. Symeon Akis. Papadopoulos is also partner in Helios, and he's a senior researcher at Information Technologies Institute, ITI, of the Center of Research and Technology Hellas, CERTH in short. Symeon has been involved as a principal investigator or key member of the CERTH. One moment, I made you the moderator, so you can already prepare. I see that we are just seeing what. So you already can prepare your presentation. I continue. A key member of the CERTH team and a number of pioneering FP7 H2020 projects. During the recent years, he has been actively working in the fields of web and social media mining and information retrieval, and more specifically on the challenge of online disinformation, with a focus on the development of tools that help journalists and citizens to verify online media content. Hi, Akis.
Hello again. Thank you very much, Carmen, for this introduction and for the invitation. I'd like to offer a perspective on the discussion with a slightly different starting point. We see that the majority of debates on contact tracing typically revolve around the key questions of effectiveness and privacy, and rightfully so. A related but slightly less discussed aspect of contact tracing that I'd like to bring to the table has to do with the issue of disinformation and how this could potentially affect trust and ultimately the success of contact tracing. Well, some basic background, I think we are all familiar with. The complexity and pervasiveness of the pandemic has really had a massive impact on our lives. It also dominated the public agenda and online discussions, and this led to a flood of information at unprecedented scale, variety, and velocity. Much of this information turned out to be false, inaccurate, or even fabricated. Misinformation found fertile ground and spread through a complex ecosystem that comprised established media, social media, public authorities, politicians, celebrities, and other public figures. It's probably the first time where we are witnessing such a diverse set of actors getting involved in the spread of various types of misinformation. This includes, among others, conspiracy theories, misreporting, false tips for prevention, treatment, recovery, and of course, scams. In parallel to the actual pandemic, we're actually seeing an infodemic set in motion. Just to get more concrete, I present here some very popular cases of misinformation that have become widespread on social media. Many of them pertain to the origin of the virus. For instance, several sources claim that the virus was the result of a leak from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Others that it was bioengineered, while others attributed it to a plan involving the Pierre Institute, or even a population control scheme designed by Bill Gates. Similarly, several people blame the 5G mobile phone networks, while others doubt the official statistics provided by the governments to back up their claims. They even refer to fake nurse whistleblower videos. Others see an opportunity to promote racial, ethnic, and religious hate. And unfortunately, many fall for a number of false treatments and cures that sometimes even turn out to be lethal. While for many of us, especially the tech-savvy and digitally literate audiences, these seem very easy to debunk and we can safely ignore them. We shouldn't underestimate the extent to which these are adopted by different parts of the population, for instance, marginalized groups or media illiterate people with low levels of media literacy. In contrast to such clear-cut cases of misinformation, there has been one notable controversial case where a lot of conflicting information was provided by multiple official sources. And this was the public use of face masks. Although authorities, especially Asian ones, have been recommending the use of face masks since the beginning of the pandemic, in many other parts of the world, conflicting advice has been given, and this has caused confusion among the general population. Several governments and institutions, such as the United States, initially dismissed the use of face masks by the general population. And often they offered misleading or incomplete information about their usefulness. It was only in early June that actually the World Health Organization itself started recommending the use of cloth face masks by the general public. And this was also backed by a meta-analysis of 172 related studies, which indicated the significant benefits of general use of face masks. This example illustrates the complexity of the questions that arise in such a volatile environment, and that the notion of truth is constantly evolving. And what about contact tracing? Well, for starters, there have been a number of misinformation cases about contact tracing. For instance, when the NHS app was first announced by the UK government and before the recent fiasco, several false privacy concerns became very popular points of discussion in certain Facebook groups. And this pertained to privacy concerns, of course, and they weren't actually true. Also, a popular misconception is related to the iOS exposure notification API, and that is that its installation would supposedly allow authorities to track phone users' locations and encounters, which is exactly what this API does not do. An even more far-fetched theory implicates Bill Gates in the negotiation of a $100 billion contact tracing deal with a Democratic congressman sponsor 6 months before the coronavirus pandemic. This was also debunked. But besides these cases of misinformation about contact tracing, the actual impact of misinformation on contact tracing app success might potentially be bigger. Misinformation gradually erodes trust in authorities and is therefore expected to lead to increased citizen concerns about the intention of having such apps installed in as large parts of the population as possible. It is hard to imagine that a person who believes in 5G and population control conspiracy theories would be friendly to the concept of a state-provided app for contact tracing. Related to that, the very recent 2020 Digital News Report by the Reuters Institute gives some interesting insights into the different sources that people trust in terms of news, but we could extend this also for other aspects. Fortunately, scientists and doctors top the list at the 83% rate, and they are followed by National Health Organization at 76%, and later news organizations at 59%, which is quite okay. More alarming is the fact that people have considerably lower trust in politicians, rightfully so, I might add, only 35%, And even more so, why big social media and search engine companies are also not perceived as trustworthy. Given the above, a reasonable question to ask is the following. Could we expect that contact tracing apps will be installed by a large enough portion of the population? Here I quote some studies. Atia in the beginning also mentioned, I think, 2 of those. So there has been evidence among a sample of 6,000 adults in several countries in Europe and in the US that 75% of users would be open to installing such apps. Another study in the US with American respondents resulted in a much lower percentages of acceptance, like in the order of 30 to 40%. And actual real-world installation in different countries like Norway, Germany, Italy, they are even lower. Of course, it's just the first days after the availability of these apps. But this is indicative of that we can't possibly reach the majority of the population. And there has been a study by epidemiologists in the University of Oxford that for contact tracing to be effective, ideally we would need more than 50% of the population to have such apps installed. So to sum up, I feel that privacy and trust are the primary factors that seem to determine adoption rates of contact tracing solutions and ultimately their success. While privacy has rightfully dominated the discussion around contact tracing app design and implementation, I believe that we should also look carefully into how we can integrate trust as a key component of the contact tracing app deployment strategy. As a starting point for such a discussion, I believe that the following trust hygiene factors should be considered: transparency in communications about the app, evidence-driven and inclusive decision-making, availability of accurate and accessible information, and countering of misinformation narratives. Thank you very much for your attention. Here is my contact detail and also some relevant links.
Yes, thank you very much, Akis. And we are coming now to the final speaker. This was very interesting because it shows the research which is going on right now in Helios, as it's, again, it's beyond the contact tracing app. It's pointing in the future. And now we're coming to our guest speaker, Steen. He waited the whole time, and I hope you're still there. Hi, Steen.
Hello. I'm still here, still awake. Yeah.
I'm sorry, this is of course getting longer. I want everybody, this is more workshop style, so it is longer, and who cannot make it anymore, of course, can drop out anytime. But thank you for being here. Everybody who's still here, thank you. And Steen, I will now give you the moderator role and will introduce you at the same time. So Steen Rasmussen is from University of Southern Denmark and Santa Fe Institute with his talk on dark numbers in the COVID-19 pandemic testing and manual versus automated contact tracing. So now short CV. Steen is professor in physics and center director, University of Southern Denmark. So our first Danish speaker today, external research professor, Santa Fe Institute, New Mexico, USA, co-founder and CTO, Transparent Internet, Spain and Denmark, and the co-founder and CEO of Bing Technologies, IVS. Dr. Rasmussen has worked for more than 30 years developing the science and technology underpinning living and intelligent processes at universities and laboratories across Europe and USA, and most recently also in companies. And he, since 2003, he has led international research initiatives across the US, Europe, and Denmark, and he has won more than 39 million in competitive basic research grants to his home institutions and international research consortia. So welcome, Steen.
Thank you.
overgive you the presentation role.
Yeah, so am I sharing my screen?
Yes, I see it. I see
All
dark
right.
numbers, the COVID-19. If you like,
Okay.
we can make it full blow.
Let me see if I can figure this out here. So can you see my screen?
Yes. I also see the right side, but it's fine. I see
Okay,
it.
so you can see. Okay, so maybe what I should do is not show. I should just have the regular.
Yeah.
Yeah, like this. Is that better?
Perfect.
Okay. All right.
Better.
So I plan to. There's sort of four punchlines I'd like to make. I'll first say a few words about the COVID-19 data and also the simulations we've done. I'll emphasize what kind of assumptions we've made about the dark numbers and what we already know. And then I will say something about how we can identify the size of these asymptomatic or the dark numbers. And then I'll say what all of this means to contracting applications or contract tracing applications. So, okay, so I'm wondering how I do here. Maybe I do like this, or I can't. So I don't understand. Why can I not move my, now we go. Okay, so yeah, all right. So just to give you an overview. So this is, these are the data. You have time on the x-axis, and we have the number of people who went to the hospital or ICU, in intensive care units, as well as the people who died from the infection in Denmark. The dots are the purple dots are the numbers that went to the hospital, and the orange dots are the people who went to intensive care units, and the blue dots are the ones that actually died. And this is from the start of the infection, which was it started in mid to late February, when a bunch of people came back from skiing in Austria and Italy. And then we have the simulations, which are the solid lines. Now, if we just take a little closer look at what we've done here, then you can see that on this is the same picture we see again. On the left side, we have the infection dynamics. There is a peak going up for the people who are in incubation. They have an incubation time of about 5 days. And then you can either be symptomatic or asymptomatic. The curve that goes up, the orange curve, is asymptomatic, and the yellow curve is for the symptomatic. There are significantly more of those. We'll get back to that. And if you look up in the right-hand side, this is the simplest version of the model we've made. The orange boxes indicate the so-called CERTH model, where we have some symptomatic people that can become infected, and these infected people are spending some time in incubation before they either become symptomatic or asymptomatic, and then eventually they recover. However, we should note that only people who are symptomatic go to the hospital or go into the intensive care units or die. You can also die from an elder care unit or at home. But it's only the size of the symptomatic population that decides how many people goes to the hospital or dies. So that's a very important thing. So we've tried more sophisticated, more detailed both hospital model and age distributions, because there's a difference between how people in different age groups they react, but it doesn't make any difference in terms of the results. So again, we want to figure out what these dark numbers are and what they mean. So one thing that's certain is that the symptomatic people, the people who have symptoms, they are more infectious than the ones that are asymptomatic. And if that is true, then it must be true that the larger, it logically follows that the larger this asymptomatic population is, the less infectious will the individuals from that population be. Again, remembering that the population that generates all the historical data, the death numbers and the hospital numbers, has to be constant. It's determined by, or it's dictated by these numbers that that we actually can measure. I mean, nobody has actually measured how many people have been infected, how many people have been symptomatic or asymptomatic. It's sort of one of the big jokers in all of that. So we've talked to doctors and plowed through the what's it called, the literature, and we also have one of the main doctors from the Central Hospital in Copenhagen to be our co-author on this work here. One interesting thing though is that if you look at there's several cruise ships in play here. There's one from Argentina that went to Antarctica, and they showed that they had infection going on that boat. And before they reached back, then there was about 81% that were asymptomatic and about 19% that were symptomatic. Diamond Princess has about 50-50, but these are much older and much more frail individuals that were on that trip. Now, this big curve here, or this big graph, shows what happens once you put our assumption into the simulation. So on the x-axis, we have the number of asymptomatic people divided by the number of symptomatic people. And then on the y-axis, we get how infectious this disease has to be to generate the corresponding ratio between asymptomatic and symptomatic. You can imagine that, well, again, remembering the symptomatic population is fixed by the numbers of people who got sick and who actually went to the hospital and who died. But the asymptomatic population can, from a mathematical perspective, vary freely. So we can generate the Danish data nicely as long as we are on this line. So as we go further up on the line, go further out to the right, the larger the asymptomatic population will be. But we can still generate the historical numbers. If you look at, and again, there are these two different examples. So how can we fix these numbers? Well, if we know how long time an individual keeps immunity after this person has been sick, then we can go out and measure with blood tests or serological blood tests. We can see how many has the antibodies against the SARS-CoV-2 virus, if we know how long time on average an individual would keep it. But these numbers are still being worked out by the biologists. Now, let me just tell you how that is possible. If you look at the graph here, we have time out of the x-axis, and then we have this relationship I showed before, where the relationship between the asymptomatic and the symptomatic, and this red line where you have the infectious parameter. And if you lose your immunity very fast, then the recovered population will decline very fast. If you lose your immunity slowly, then the recovered population will stay for a long time. The upper surface is for a long memory, immunological memory, and the lower one is for a short immunological memory. Actually, it's only for 10 days, which is completely unrealistic, but just to show the difference between these two surfaces. So if you go in, let's say it's 60 days, we had the head of the Danish blood bank coming out postulating, because they have measured on the blood. It turns out that these tests, they were not good enough, but he indicated that about 110,000 people, 1.9% of the Danish population actually had been through this COVID-19. If this was true, then if we could measure this, we could go out and measure the population at a later time, we could then figure out how long the immunological memory is, or if we knew it beforehand, we just needed one single measurement. I know this is a little bit much, but just remember that after you've been infected, it's the same if you have a cold. I mean, all coronaviruses, they confuse our immune system, and we lose our immunity quite often or quite fast. I mean, the common cold, that's one of them anyways, that are caused by also coronavirus, we'll have a memory of about a year. So half of us will have forgotten it from the next till the next season. So then we'll catch a cold again. But anyways, this is a method by which we can define, we can measure these dark numbers. So, okay, let's see, what does all of this mean? Well, unfortunately, I don't think anybody, certainly not in this country, we haven't made these serological tests in a randomized and controlled manner. I don't think they've been done anywhere in any country. If you have happens to know that this has happened with reliable numbers, I would love to know about it. But tentatively, I would say that there's about 4 to 5 times as many asymptomatic as there are symptomatic. And again, I just showed that we can estimate the dark numbers from a single randomized population-wide blood test for antibodies if we know the immunological memory. And by making 2 tests at 2 different times across the population, we'll be able to both fix the dark numbers as well as the immunological memory. Now, the good news here is that the larger the dark numbers are, the less we have to worry about infections from these asymptomatic individuals. I mean, they are much less infectious than the what's it called, the symptomatic people are. And we could also see from the response of the Danish population that, well, I would estimate that we need about 25,000 tests a day in case a second wave hits us. And another thing that I think is really important to remember is that one of these contact tracing apps is at best a supplement to manual contact tracing. We need to have a massive contact tracing team in place if we want to be able to prevent a second wave to come. So that has to be the primary. But I think that if we have if we apply contact tracing apps with good privacy, then people will slowly, hopefully, be comfortable with them, and then they can help also to collect great or better pandemic data that can be, can teach us better how we can be prepared in the future. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Steen. Thank you. Wow, this is a full day of. This is great. You are in the middle of doing this for Denmark. I think you're the one who really asked to come in the field and help this country and us all, of course, to analyze the data. So it's not only contact tracing, but also what you did. So we understand better what to do for the second phase. It's amazing. So I'm taking back the moderator role now, and I will now, as it's really late, I know you all actually are hungry, want to drink coffee and want to go home. But I just want to make one audience survey. I just want to do it to just make a short ask everybody if you would install, and that's also the question I will throw in the room, would you install and use an app on your own mobile for contact tracing? I have it now out. I don't think that the speakers can see it. It's only the audience sees it. Yes, but only a decentralized app for contact tracing. Yes, but only a centralized app for contact tracing. Yes, I would use any app which my government suggests me. No, I would use none. And of course, we don't have Willis' new possibility in it, which was encounter tracing instead of people tracing. But I see people voted, and I'm telling you the results. 35% said yes, but only a decentralized app for contact tracing. 8% yes, but only a centralized app for contact tracing. 44% said yes, I would use any app which my government suggests, and 33% no, I would use none. This is I show you maybe I can even show it to everybody, but this is exactly what I think happens. It's like we have different opinions, and it's very difficult to basically allow all the people to use apps, and not everybody wants it, and not everybody is informed. But this was basically our short audience survey. And now I'm gonna make the rounds. So maybe this is gonna be slowly going to the end. Whoever is speaker is still there. I'm gonna have this question to each of you who wants to answer. And I start with Steen because he's my, I see you, Steen. My question, how your ideal contact tracing app functions in terms of trust and privacy? Don't make it too long.
No, I think that it's more important to get it right than to be fast. And I think that since fortunately most countries have the pandemic under control, I think that it's more important that we now have some time to socialize the app and have people who knows who has the individuals, I mean the population's trust, maybe, I don't know, have people, unwilling people out, make some information programs on TV and the radio where experts can discuss these things calmly, so that we can socialize it for a while, and then when the cold weather hits, then hopefully, knock on wood, it won't happen again. We won't need it, but then more people will be comfortable to download it. But again, it is only, the way I see it is, it can only be a supplement to a massive manual contact tracing effort in each country. That's my opinion. And of course, it'll be crazy. It is kind of crazy that we have all these individual national apps. I mean, we should coordinate them, because we want to be able to move around in different places.
Yes, thank you. Feel free, the other speakers who would like to say their opinion on the same question. How would your ideal contact tracing app function? Anybody of you would like to share their opinions? Yeah, Atia, she dares. And Ville, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I think that mainly the main thing, as also Steen was saying, is to build some trust on society, and then gain more adoption, and then have better data. And for this, I think that first, this solution will need to be open source in order to help to transparency and auditability. It needs to be accessible and inclusive. So maybe we need to think about some hybrid methodologies in order to include those people that don't have access to technology. And also we need to include a multidisciplinary team in designing this solution, because we need to be able to show that this privacy by design, privacy preserving by design, it's really being accomplished. And that's it. I'm going fast.
Thank you. And Ville, maybe you would like to.
Yeah. Just on an additional note there, that in addition to actual apps, what we have, or tracing solutions, when we take them into use, we should also define very precise policies that under which conditions we stop using them, and delete all data. So everything define the end point of the tracing in advance. So that I think that would be one of the things to make people more confident to use them, that it's does not last forever. Okay.
Yes.
My 2 cents.
Thank you. I don't know if some other speakers would like to say something. If not, I have a direct question to Ville before maybe somebody else wants to say something. It comes from the audience. I am just takes 1 second to get it to you, because somebody said it's especially for you, and thanks for Ville, great job. It's from Marcelo Sousa. can you say a little more on how fake news would spread less on a decentralized social network? Sorry, Ville, how backend interact with people may be in contact with diagnosed person? That was the question. How does the backend interact with people who are in contact with diagnosed persons?
Okay, so if we think about the apps and let's say the decentralized and also this is a decentralized way if we are using these encounter tracing, not people tracing. The list of those encounters where there has been a chance of getting infected. The list of those encounters are published, but it is only the other side of that contact which actually recognizes that thing. So it's like broadcasting that information that these are the numbers. If you happen to have in your lottery ticket exactly the same numbers, then congratulations, you have won. Go to the test. That's basically it.
Thank you. This was the question from Kadia Zabiri. Thank you. So
Thank you.
I think as time is passing, if one of you other speakers want to say one more your opinion on how your ideal contact tracing app may show up, else I'm slowly but surely, as we are turning into 5 o'clock very soon, I want to thank everybody. I know there are more questions out there. There are many questions. I will share them with the speakers afterwards. So if the speaker feels like he will answer your question, as we have your questions here in the table, so your questions are not lost. Thank you for participating. Thank you, everybody, and especially all our great speakers from Teresa, Atia, and then Pierre and Daphné and Ville and Barbara and Kevin and Akis and Steen. Thank you very much for joining us here today. And please join us for the next web cafe if you wish. That's already tomorrow. So if you have nothing to do in your life, join at 3 o'clock tomorrow again. There will be Martin Wells, Senior AI Solution Architect from Fraunhofer Institute, with his talk on proposing AI pipelines with AI4EU experiments. It will be a pleasure to meet you tomorrow again. But back to the evening now, and please enjoy, everybody, the afternoon and the evening hours. Thank you and bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.